Well, I'm Jeff, and I'm the pastor here. Happy Easter. Yeah, you're going to cut it. All right. Here we go. I'm Jeff, and I'm the pastor here. Happy Easter. Yeah, you don't want me to start this thing over and over and over again, do you? You're like, oh, please stop right now. So that would be great. Anyway, happy Easter. So glad you're here with us today. And you know, the news of Easter is far better than you've imagined in a long time. Now, maybe at some point in your life, you kind of got a glimpse of it, and maybe you've embraced it, and maybe a few of us have kept it dusted off and center in our lives where we just really understand the power of Easter. But chances are, if you're like me, after you hear a story a few times, it kind of fades a little bit, kind of gets old, a little bit dusty. We forget the power of it, we forget the meaning of it, and that might be true for you today. And if it is, today's a very good day for you. And if you've never heard this story before, that's an even better day for you. Because this story I want to share with you today, the story of Easter, most magnificent story ever told. But it's a true story. It's a real story. It's a part of history. It's a part of what really happened in the life of Jesus, who I take to be the Son of God. And that's really good news for all of us. Now, over here helping us interpret Easter today is Miss Leslyn Rushing. And she was Kentucky's elementary school art teacher of the year last year. How about that? And so she's going to paint us into Easter. How about that? She's going to help us kind of interpret some of what I want to be sharing with words. She's going to be putting into picture as only an artist can do. So I'm grateful that Leslyn's joined us today to help us celebrate this news of Easter. You know, the story of Easter, the story of Jesus' resurrection, is the most revolutionary revelation of all time. It's the most remarkable story ever told. It changed everything in the universe. This story of the resurrection of Jesus. So much so that the first church, the early Christians, the one who followed Jesus first, their lives were remarkably changed. They were changed from people that were afraid and who were scared into people that would stand against the forces of darkness, who would stand in front of death itself and wouldn't give up on this story that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus rose from the dead. And this is really powerful news. One of the writers of the New Testament is a person named Paul. That's how we know him today. He started out as Saul. Now, Saul, in his early career, was a devout Jew. He was a devout follower of God. He believed in God, he trusted God, and he had a story about God that didn't fit the Jesus story. And so for Paul, who was an aspiring scribe, lawyer person who knew a lot about the laws of God, he wanted to get rid of this news of Jesus, the early news of Jesus. And so in his early career, before he became Paul and was known as Saul, he would actually go into towns and cities and spy on people and find people who believed in the way, who believed in Jesus. And then do you know what he would do to them? He would have them killed. He would see that they were persecuted and killed for their faith. And yet he turns around and he becomes a person who writes most of what we call the New Testament. He writes nearly every book, and they were originally letters, many of them. He writes many of the letters in the New Testament to churches that are young to teach people about following Jesus. Now, how can that be? That a person would move from trying to crush the faith and kill the faith to one who would stand for the faith and risk his life for the faith. How can that be? I believe it happens because of this story of Easter. I believe it happens because something happened that was true. Something happened that was historical. Something happened that was revolutionary. So, I want to take you into that story. I want to take you into a writing of Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. If you have one of these, the scriptures will be on the back of this. They'll be on the screen, and I'll be reading them too, so you get them several ways. But I would encourage you to make some notes, to circle some things today, and to pay attention to this story, because this is an important story. 1 Corinthians 15, this was a writing to a church in Corinth that Paul was encouraging to remember some things about their faith. And it's important for us today to remember some things about our faith. Even here in Centerfield, Kentucky, thousands of years later, it's important to still remember this story. So here we go. This is what Paul has to say. 1 Corinthians 15, starting at verse 3. For I passed down to you the crux of it all, which I had also received from others, that the Anointed One, the liberating King, died for our sins and was buried and raised from the dead on the third day. All this happened to fulfill the Scriptures. It was the perfect climax to God's covenant story. Afterward, he appeared alive to Cephas. You may know him as Simon Peter. Then to the rest of the 12. If that were not amazing enough, on one occasion he appeared to more than 500 believers at one time. Many of those brothers and sisters are still around to tell the story, though some have fallen asleep in Jesus. Soon he appeared to James, his brother, and the leader of the Jerusalem church, and then to all the rest of the emissaries he himself commissioned. Last of all, he appeared to me. I was like a child snatched from his mother's womb. You see, I am the least of all of his emissaries, not fit to be called his emissary, because I hunted down and persecuted God's church. Today, I am who I am because of God's grace, and I have made sure that the grace he offered me has not been wasted. I have worked harder, longer, and smarter than all the rest, and I'm far more humble than everybody else, too. But I realize it's not me. It is God's grace with me that has made the difference. In the end, it doesn't matter whether it was I or the other witnesses who brought you to the message. What matters is that we keep preaching and that you have faith in this message. And so let's loop back. What was his message? Go back to verse 3. What's the crux of the message? It's this: that Jesus, the liberating King, the anointed one, that he did what? That he died for our sins. That he was buried, and then what? He was raised from the dead on the third day. Now that is remarkable news. And this is why this news is so important for me today. And this is what I hope. I believe if I can help you dust off this news, and if you can take this news as really good news and you can unpack it for what it means, that you'll leave here more joyful, more filled with the Spirit of God, more hopeful than you've been in a long time. More certain of an outcome past your death than you've been in a long time and maybe ever. That you'll understand more of what God wants to do in your life today. If this story can come alive in your life, if I can help spark that story, if I can be a catalyst to help you get this story, it would make me just amazingly happy if we could just raise the bar of this story in your life. Because when that happens, it'll change everything. It will remind you of the hope you have that's bigger than what you presently face. It's bigger than your present challenges. And it's bigger than what holds you down right now and what stresses you out right now. This news of Easter is bigger and better than all of that. So that's what I'm going to try to do today, is just blow the dust off of this story and let you see it. And if I can, it'll be powerful for you. So that's my hope. So let's dive into this passage. And I want to look at it more closely. I want to take it apart just a little at a time. Just a little at a time. That Jesus was raised from the dead on the third day. Now that's the basic Easter story, right? That's what Leslin is painting over here. There's a tomb and there's a garden and there's this story that begins to come alive of Jesus' followers, in particular some of the women who arrive that first Easter morning at an empty tomb, and they can't figure out what's going on, and this is weird to all of his followers. You see, in that day and time, just like today's day and time, we really don't believe that people come back from the dead. That is not something that's common. You know, at the stage in life where I am right now, and because I'm a pastor, I get to attend a lot of funerals. And I say get to because going to a funeral is a sobering reminder of what's important in life. It kind of puts things in order, like, okay, this is important, and that's not. It clarifies things real fast. But also, it reminds me of how hard life can be sometimes as we say goodbye to people that we love. So don't take what I'm about to share with you lightly, because there's a lot of pain involved in this, but hear this. Julie and I went to a receiving line. We went to a visitation for a friend who died this past week. We went just the other day. And we stood in line for a long time because he was much loved. Beautiful person, Christ follower, lots of hope for his future. And yes, we all know he's in a better place, and all the things that we say, that's all true. However, it still hurts, and it's still hard. But I wondered with Julie as we talked about Easter this morning while we're getting ready to come to worship today. And I said, wouldn't it be remarkable if somebody called us on the phone right now and they said, hey, did you know that he's alive? And I would go, hello? And they'd say, yeah, he's alive. No, you don't understand. I went through the receiving line. I saw him in a casket. He was buried just yesterday. I'm quite certain he is not alive. Now, would I believe their story no matter how adamant they were that it was true? Would I believe them? Would you believe them? How many of you would believe them? Even if it's somebody you trusted. Come on. You trust them, but you wouldn't believe them, would you? Because we know this doesn't happen, right? We know that people don't come back from the dead. Kind of reminds me of Ken Davis and the story he tells. Ken Davis lives down in Nashville, Tennessee. He lives in a nice part of town, but where the houses are pretty close together, and they've got little picket fences, and he's no exception. He had a little picket fence in his backyard, and he also had a hound, a dog, like one of those red tick hounds. Is that what they're called? Red tick or red bone? What? Blue tick? What about a red something? Red bone, blue tick. I'm scared. I think it's a red bone, not a blue tick. Something that big old snout and hunting dog and just a doggy dog. A woof, woof, hunting dog. You know what I'm saying? So he's got his dog out in the backyard and he's sipping some coffee. And the dog jumps the neighbor's fence. And then goes over and he turns away. And then he sees the dog. And the dog has this white, fluffy Easter bunny in his mouth. And just shaking the life out of that thing. Holy moly. So he runs out the back door. He jumps the fence. He tries to get the bunny out of the dog's mouth. The dog won't give it up. He's like, got it. Yeah. You know how dogs are. They're happy then. They're like, I got it. I got it. He's just shaking the life out of it. So he runs back in the house. He grabs a broom. He comes back, jumps the fence again, starts beating the dog. And finally the dog gives up the bunny. So Ken brings the bunny back in his house. He's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? These neighbors don't like me already. And now my dog has killed their bunny. And Ken's a Christ follower, so what would a good Christ follower do? Go buy another bunny. It's just a standard white bunny with red eyes. I mean, they're a dime a dozen, right? You can get them anywhere. Well, Ken tries to dust off the bunny. He realizes this bunny's really dead. And these neighbors hate me already. So he does what most of us would do. And he goes and he buys another bunny. Slinks over the neighbor's fence, puts it in the hutch, and comes back and gets the dog squared away. He's like, hope that's avoided. The next morning, he's having coffee in the same kitchen, looking out the back window. He hears his neighbor's wife start to scream, and she's screaming, she's just yelling and screaming and carrying on. And he runs out the back door, and Caesar says, what's wrong? She said, he's back. He's like, who's back? What are you talking about? He said, the bunny, he died 5 days ago and he's back in the cage. He's like, oh, okay. He just goes back into his house. He's like, what are you supposed to do then, right? But we know things don't come back to life, right? We just know it doesn't happen that way. That's not how life works. Dead things don't come back to life automatically. As much as we wish they did, it just doesn't happen that way. And so this news of Jesus is even stranger than that. I mean, he's back. And the first church, these early Christians, these people that were facing incredible persecution, had changed lives because of this story. And they insisted on telling this story over and over and over again that Jesus truly is the Son of God. And they would say, in the face of extreme persecution and powerful rulers, they would say that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. And the powers would say to them, you can't say that. You must say that Caesar is Lord and that Jesus is not. And they wouldn't back down and they wouldn't shut up. Why not? Because they saw something. They believed something. They saw something that changed them. And Paul reminds us of this news of this first story. And he goes on, he says this, he appeared to Cephas, you may know him as Simon Peter, then to the rest of the 12. And if that wasn't amazing enough, he appeared to more than 500 people at one time. Imagine if we gave all 500 of those eyewitnesses just 10 minutes to tell their Jesus story and paraded them across this stage. 5,000 minutes of testimony. I don't know how many hours that is, but it'll be a long time. And we would sit here and listen story after story after story after story. Why does Paul put this in this letter to this church in Corinth? Why does he do it this way? Why does he tell them there are 500, and he clarifies them, 500 who what? Some of who are what? Still alive. Why is this important? Because if you don't believe me, then what can you do? Go check around, dude. See if what I'm telling you isn't true. Go check the story. Go see if this is true. And they could have checked it out. And if it had been anything less than true, it would have been proven long ago. And this movement wrapped around the notion that Jesus is the Son of God and that Jesus rose from the dead, that news would have been stomped out a long time ago and long forgotten, along with so many other religions that have started and failed and gone away. But it is still moving forward because that story is true. Now, those 500 and those 12 and Peter and Paul and others that saw Jesus, what did they see? What did they experience when they experienced Jesus after the resurrection? This is important news. What did they see? Did they see a ghost? Just something flitting through the atmosphere? Maybe a little apparition? Is that what they saw? Nope. Did they see a half-dead, mummified kind of zombie-oid thing kind of wrapped up and barely able to move and coming out of the grave and spitting up worms? Is that what they saw? Is that what they saw? I know they didn't see that. Do you know how I know they didn't see that? Because they lived revolutionary lives. This remarkable resurrection of Jesus led to revolutionary lives. Because they saw something better than that. They saw Jesus. This is how they experienced Jesus. John 20 tells us that a group of early followers were gathered behind closed doors, afraid of persecution from the rulers who had killed Jesus. And they're gathered behind closed doors. And guess who shows up in the middle of the room without opening a door? Jesus. He speaks to them for a moment, and then he leaves. He does this several times. He pops into and out of their lives. He shows up on a seashore, and he has a seafood breakfast with his disciples, with Peter and some others who had lost hope, who had betrayed Jesus, and he restores them. He walks beside some followers of Jesus who thought all hope had died with Jesus. He walks with them on the road to a city called Emmaus. And for a while he talks to them about what had happened. And they said, haven't you heard about what happened? And Jesus just acts like he doesn't know anything and lets them just tell the story. Well, Jesus, who we took to be the Son of God, who we took to be the Messiah, has died. And Jesus lets them go on for a while. And finally he says to them, it's me. Check it out, dudes. I'm here. I mean, he's got this, what N.T. Wright, who's an author theologian, he calls it a transphysical body. This transphysical body could do amazing things. It could pass through doors. It could eat food or not eat food. It could appear. It could disappear. It could be here or it could be there. It's pretty amazing, right? All the things you wish you could do right now, he could do. He's like superhero kind of stuff, you know? He's got it all wrapped up into this transphysical body. And it's pretty amazing. So what these early followers saw in Jesus was not a half undead kind of mummy thing. It wasn't a ghost or an apparition. It was a real body that was transphysical. And it was really cool. And it energized those early followers so much that you couldn't get them to shut up. Paul, who writes this passage, is writing it from prison, where he wrote most of the stuff he wrote. From prison, for being a follower of this Jesus. Peter, who had turned his back on Jesus, just a few weeks after Jesus died and was raised again, that same Peter who was afraid of those authorities stood in front of those same authorities who had killed Jesus. And you know what he said to them? He points his finger right into their eyes and he says, and it was you who killed him, the Son of God, and it was you who nailed him to a cross, and it was you who put him in a grave. But I'm here to tell you that he rose from the dead. And they tried to shut him up, and he wouldn't shut up. And these early followers of Jesus, man, they would go into a city and they would preach. And time after time, when they would preach this news of Jesus, a resurrected, transphysical, new kind of life is available through Jesus. It's a story they told over and over again. They tried to get them to shut up, and they wouldn't shut up. So what would happen is a lot of times they would go into a city and they would start preaching the news. And it would get people so stirred up that the local religious establishment would get real nervous. Like, oh my goodness, they're still telling a story that's not true. This can't be true. So they would tell him, you have to shut up. Don't talk about Jesus anymore. And you know what these guys would do? They'd get their butts drug out of the city, because you're not allowed to hurt people inside the city. So you take them outside the city, and they would stone them, and they would beat them, and they would leave them near death. And tell them, now that's it. Don't come back here anymore telling any more of these stories about Jesus. Just shut up about him. And you know what they did? Paul, when he would finally come to, he'd go, that wasn't so bad. He'd get back up, he'd walk back into the city, and he would start all over again. He'd say, well, you didn't kill me yet, so let me tell you about this Jesus. And he would go on about it again. And they couldn't shut up these early followers. Now, if this had been a hoax, would you die for a hoax? If this had been some maybe ghostly little apparition that they thought they maybe kind of sort of saw in Jesus after his resurrection, would you risk anything for that? I wouldn't. I believe this is a totally true story, as true as any story in history, because of the lives that were changed by the story, because they saw something, they experienced something that changed them from the inside out. This story of Jesus is as historical a fact as you can find. Let me ask you a question. Who was the first president of the United States? George Washington, thank you. Now, prove that. Prove it. How would you go about proving that? Google it. Everything on Google is absolutely true. Yeah. You would find documents, and you would find things, and you would say, well, the story, a bunch of people said it's true and must be true. I think it is true. Well, you could say to me, well, prove the resurrection of Jesus. And I would take you to the same sorts of proofs. And I would take you to the same kind of history. And I would take you through the same exercise. And I would say, I can prove this as much as you can prove anything in American history that's more than 10 years old. I take it to be totally true that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was God himself, and that he hung on a cross. He died for your sins and my sins, that he was in the grave for 3 days, and that he rose again after 3 days to have a resurrected body. Paul believed that too, so much so that further down in 1 Corinthians 15, this is not in your write-ups, but just listen to this. He believes this so much, and he talks to those early followers of Jesus. And why should we ourselves be continually risking our lives, facing death hour after hour? For I swear, dear brothers and sisters, I face death daily. This is as certain as my pride in what the Lord Jesus Christ has done in you. And what value was there in fighting wild beasts if there will be no resurrection from the dead? If there is no resurrection, then we are hopeless. But he goes on and says, but because Jesus indeed did rise from the dead, there is great hope. And what he says to these early followers is, don't pay so much attention to your current circumstance. You've got to look through your current situation and know that there's more. You've got to know that the end of, when you say goodbye to someone here on this planet, that's not the end. When a relationship you hold dear ends, how I hurt for you. I'm so sorry. But that's not the end of your story. That's not all there is. There is more. For Christ followers, for ones who choose to take Jesus as their king, who choose to say that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not, whoever your Caesar is, there's great promise and great hope in your future. Here's the way I think it goes down for us Christ followers, people who choose to follow Jesus. And what I mean by follow Jesus is, yes, admit with your head that he is who he said he was, and yes, admit he was historical fact, but more than that, be willing to follow Jesus with your life. Be willing to put some skin in the game and say, you know, I believe the story of Jesus is so true that I will take this to be the most important thing I could do with my life, to follow him. Those sorts of people have this kind of promise. That yes, we will all die someday. Fact. It's just true. Nobody gets out alive. However, I have discovered this. that those who have the most birthdays live the longest. Pretty sure of that. Okay? Yeah, but everything else, all bets are off. We all are going to die physically. But for those who follow Jesus, who take him as their Lord, yes, Savior, but also Lord, as the leader of their lives, this is the promise. That you will leave this body and you'll be immediately with Jesus and with God in a place called paradise. You won't have a body yet. You'll be with him. Paul says it that some have fallen asleep. Now, it won't be like you're unaware of things, but you will be very aware of where you are. You'll know where you are, and you'll know you're in the presence of God. And paradise will be an amazing place. But that's not the end. The best is yet to come. The best happens after paradise. Because there comes a time in the future when Jesus promises to come back. You see, what happened at the resurrection was just the beginning. It's just the beginning of the future. It's just the beginning when God is beginning to restore things and to make things right. So Jesus raises from the dead, and Paul calls him the first fruits of the new creation in 1 Corinthians 15:20. He says he's the first fruits. He's the beginning of this restoration project that God is doing. There will come a day when God will bring a new heaven and a new earth together with this earth and restore all things. And at that moment, he makes all things new and transphysical the way Jesus was at his resurrection. Now that's something to get excited about, isn't it? That someday you'll have a body that doesn't break down and hair doesn't turn gray or turn loose. You can just move right on into this incredible buff body that you don't have to worry about feeding it right. I don't know if you or whatever. I don't know what happened, but it's just good, man. It's just a good body, man. It's like Iron Man City all the time. But even beyond that, where all the capabilities that a human is capable of are finally unlocked and made whole. Isn't that fantastic news? That the earth gets restored the way Leslin is painting this over here with the flowers and everything's in bloom, and spring is a reminder that there is hope. You see, every time that you see a sunset or a sunrise, especially here in springtime in Kentucky, when everything seems right, for just a moment, things all seem right. Those are glimpses of what eternity will be like. Where the veil gets thin, where things just seem right, that's an indicator. Also, when things seem wrong, when it hurt us so desperately, and we know this just isn't right, we know that God's kingdom restoration project is not yet finished. Jesus was the first fruits, and he's coming back to restore all things and to make all things new. But we're not there yet. Living in the in-between time is tough. But I want to remind you to have a hope, to cling to hope, to cling to this news that there's a Jesus who died and rose again and was resurrected with a new kind of body that gives us promise for a new kind of future. Isn't that good news? So that's what these early followers saw, and that's what they experienced. They experienced a new kind of Jesus that revolutionized their life. This resurrected Jesus was revolutionary, and it was remarkable, and it revolutionized their lives. And they risked everything to tell this news and to spread this news and to make sure other people knew no matter what you said or did to them, they would not sit down and they would not shut up and they would not stop. They kept going no matter what their circumstances were because they believed in a far better future. You couldn't throw anything at them that would cause them to stop. You couldn't discourage them. You couldn't make them quit. They wouldn't stop because they believed this news. It revolutionized them so much. And so Paul says, that there's nothing that can stop us. And at one point he says, I'm crushed and I'm persecuted and I'm pressed down, but I don't give up hope. Because I know who rules and I know who reigns. And I know that Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. And there's nothing that Caesar can do to me. See, there's nothing that the earthly powers that we face can do to us that dent our eternal destiny. For those who choose to follow Jesus and to take him as Lord, there is a tremendous, powerful future. Romans 8:28, Paul also wrote this. He said, all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Now, how could Paul say that when he knows that we're all facing death and persecution and hardship and just bad things happening to us? How can he say this? Because he has a hope beyond this moment. He has a hope beyond this time of grief. He has a hope beyond this time of letting go of dreams. He has a hope beyond what you experience right now with bodies that fail you and relationships that break down and people that die. He has a hope bigger than that. Where does his hope come from? What's the beginning of his hope? It's what? It's Easter. It's Easter. It's the resurrection of Jesus. That's his hope, that there is something beyond this. He says, all things work together for good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. So don't you give up, and don't you give in, and don't you cave in, and don't you stop believing that God is on the way, that his kingdom restoration project is on the way. Jesus taught us how to pray. He said this. He said, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. That will be done. Where? On earth as in heaven. Why did he say that? Because that's his mission. That someday, that things on this planet are restored. That people are made right. Relationships are made right. Our bodies are healed. And there is no more death. And there is no more sorrow. And there are no more tears. And for those of us who follow Jesus, that is our great hope. That the kingdom is coming. And that there will come a day when God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're not there yet, but we're headed there. And you can live into that kind of promise. Isn't that good news?